and I put my fist through a wall. And then, boom, I put my fist through a door just because I couldn't take it, because I wasn't getting my fix of Taco Bell, which sounds so crazy to even say that. But in the moment, man, like that was all that I wanted. I needed that Taco Bell. And so in the middle of the night, after everyone had gone to bed, I snuck out of the house and I went to the 24-hour drive-through. I placed my $20 order, came home, polished off every single bite of that, and I wept. I wept as I was eating that, because that was the night that I fully realized I was addicted.
Hello out there, everyone. Here we are again. Thanks for joining us on the Switch for Good podcast. I'm Dotsie Bausch, and I'm here with Alexandra Paul. And, you know, Alexandra, when we first started this podcast, we knew that an aspect of what we wanted to cover and bring into the conversation surrounds food addiction, because we've both suffered in different ways from food addiction. And I think we even say somewhere in our intro that, you know, a good full life is not measured by the circumference of your waist, but by kind of the richness of our experiences that we get to have in this life. And your story, which we're going to do soon, because I'm not cool that you interviewed me like a year ago and then no one's canceled. That's how we got that one done, right? Because someone canceled last minute and it was like, okay, we'll do you. We're just going to schedule you in, because I was thinking about that. But your story is extraordinary for a multitude of reasons. But as it relates to food addiction, I would love for you to share some of the kind of behind the scenes pains that surrounded your bulimia, because we have a guest on today that we're going to really get to go kind of raw and real with as it relates to food addiction and topics surrounding that.
And I think a lot of our audience will relate, because even if you don't have an eating disorder, most of us have at some point disordered eating here in the United States, mostly because, well, I believe that our food is highly addictive. And so, yeah, I actually celebrated 29 years, my 29th birthday in August. And when I say birthday, I mean that's 29 years of not throwing up after 12 years of very consistent bulimia. And before that, anorexia. So I used to... when I first became abstinent, I was amazed that I was abstinent, because I never thought that I would be able to change and get rid of this obsession and this actual feeling in my chest that I needed to fill. And I filled it with food, when what I really needed to fill it with was changing my behavior about myself and becoming more authentic. Mm-hmm. Once I started saying what I wanted and really being honest with who I was around people instead of trying to please them all the time, that really went away. And in the last 29 years, I have to admit, there's maybe been, 10 times that I've thought, you know what, if I was still bulimic, I might binge and throw up right now. But really, it was about working on that hole inside me. And I remember, as an actor, the hardest thing about bulimia is hiding it. It's very stressful. Well, that's not the only hard thing, but that's a very stressful thing, is hiding my pain and what I was doing, the binging and the throwing up. It's a very humiliating thing to sort of kneel in front of the toilet and by the way, in public toilets too, and any toilet, anywhere you can. When I was in high school, I went to boarding school, and I would throw up in a plastic bag so that I could do it in the shower and people wouldn't know. So the shame associated with it on sets, I know that I'm very clear that I would never have taken the role on Baywatch where I had to be in a bathing suit all the time if I was still bulimic, because that would have just exacerbated my bulimia so much. But luckily I had a year under my belt of not throwing up. But on my very first movie called Paper Dolls, where I played a young unknown girl who becomes a model, and it's such a sort of a fairy tale, well, I was actually struggling so much with, bulimia then, and I would go back to my trailer after lunch and throw up. I felt like I had to go to lunch and eat to show people I was normal, and then I would go back to my trailer and throw up. And then, watching the movie, you'd never know that, because of course they don't touch on that kind of dark side of, well, modeling for one thing, and the reality of a lot of young girls in America.
Do you remember that first time that you decided not to throw up? You said you've had about 10 times that you thought, if I were still bulimic, but there was that first time, right, for all of us, that you made a different decision than to throw up.
I don't. Okay. I remember that I was working the 12 steps because I'd been in therapy the whole time, which I think really helped me understand myself, but it was actually going to Overeaters Anonymous and working the 12 steps and hearing other people's stories and realizing, it's possible to stop. Before that, I would look at people in the street and think, oh, they're just lying. They're all throwing up or obsessing or something. They couldn't possibly not have this huge desire to binge almost every day. So now I know the reality, and we're going to talk with our guest today about his reality, because he too came from a very dark place and has emerged and is helping people he doesn't talk about his own story as much. It comes out in some of his interviews, but on his podcast, The Exam Room, which is a podcast from PCRM, we've had several guests from PCRM on, Dr. Neil Barnard and Dr. Hannah Kaliova. He has a very successful podcast where he interviews other people about the benefits of plant-based living. And he shares a little bit, but today we're really going to dive and really learn about Chuck.
When he's done with us, he will have gone deep. For me anyway, right? Because
that's exactly
I got
right.
all the questions lined up.
Exactly. So I want to introduce Chuck Carroll to you, because I'm a fan. I listened to the Exam Room podcast. And, he didn't believe that he would live to see 30. And he knew his diet was to blame, but it was so hard to change. And he was 27 years old and he weighed 420 pounds, 66-inch waist. He's only 5 feet 6 inches tall. And he decided that he would at least try to live. So he underwent weight loss surgery and eventually adopted a plant-based diet. And he lost 275 pounds.
That's like 2 of you.
Yep, exactly. It is a little more, actually. So he lost, and then he actually, he's about my weight right now. Maybe a little more, but he's 145, 150 pounds now. Well, he'll tell us exactly how much. So he has been a sports reporter on the radio for a long time. He then married an Emmy-winning reporter also. And he now, as I said, spreads the message of health to everybody else on his podcast. I think he's a brilliant interviewer, and I think he's going to be an excellent guest. So instead of me talking about him, let's learn more about him by welcoming him to the Switch for Good podcast. Chuck Carroll, we're so happy to have you on.
Oh, thank you guys so much for having me. That's a heck of an introduction. I'm so used to doing that for other people. Like I'm sitting over here. I'm genuinely touched. Thank you.
Like sometimes it feels like, wait, who are they talking about? When you get in front, you're like, oh my God, that's me. Shoot. Okay. Oh, so excited you're here.
Yeah, thank you so much. So can we go back to the beginning and tell us a little bit about your life when you were a child and a young adult? And how you put 420 pounds on your 5 feet 6 inch frame. That's an enormous amount. And if people look at the before and after pictures, it's like a different person.
Yeah, I feel like a completely different person inside and out. There's no doubt about that. I will say, whether it's me or anyone else, getting up to that weight, it doesn't happen overnight. You really do have to go all the way back to childhood. And some of my earliest memories are of going to my grandma's house, my father's mother, right after elementary school every day. And she, Southern woman, had the jar of bacon grease on top of the stove, and it didn't matter like what it was she was fixing. It could be a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Somehow or another, that bacon grease would wind up on it. And to her, that was normal. And a vegetable to her consisted of either a can of creamed corn, which was really healthy, or baked beans. And so when you grow up and that's your healthy diet, and you're eating things like that with hot dogs and potato chips, and that's what you eat every day after school, you really get that taste for fat and salt very early on in life. And then after that, my mom would pick my brother and I up from her house. And because she was a single mom, not a whole lot of time working, we often would stop at the drive-thru on the way home. And I remember even as a kid in elementary school, it was second or third grade, I started to go through the Burger King drive-thru, and I would get that double cheeseburger with ketchup only. And I would make sure that at the time they called it going large, and I would get that biggest combo that they had available, and a second or third grade little body, and I would polish every little bite off and still want more. And so over time, that was very much my normal, but I didn't realize how addictive that stuff came to be until I got much older. But those eating habits that begin so early in life, man, they carry themselves with you until you reach a breaking point, much like what you were talking about in the intro to the show.
Mm-hmm. Chuck, I know data tells us, because I've looked it up many times, that about 30% of eating disorder sufferers have sexual molestation in their history. You are one of those by your babysitter, because as you just told that story, I'm thinking people are thinking, how did you want that much food from the drive-through? What was missing? What was the hole that you were filling at such a young age, needing to fill whatever it might be, the pain that I would love for you to talk about with food?
Well, I come from, my parents divorced when I was not even 2 yet. So it was always kind of a broken home. And my brother, he is a couple years older than I am, and he had a tremendously difficult time with that. And that, more than the divorce itself, is what left that impression on me. And it was just kind of like almost, I don't want to say feeling abandoned, because we did get an opportunity to see our dad, on the weekends every now and again. But he certainly was not the ever-present figure that, a lot of our friends had. So there was that. And then the incident with the babysitter certainly didn't help, being that young, again, probably third grade. And honestly, when that happened, I didn't really even recognize the gravity of what had just occurred. And really, it wasn't until I got older that I was like, that's really unacceptable. Mm-hmm. But, I will say that I am so grateful that my mom was able to put the kibosh on that very, very quickly, as soon as I told her. Like, that was it. Yeah. And
well, you were brave enough to tell her.
Again, I'm not really sure what happened to him. Mm-hmm. To be honest with you, but I am very grateful. I know that there are people who had it far, far, far worse than I did. But nonetheless, realizing that something wasn't quite right there, and then trying to mask the pain and the shame to a certain extent of what happened, mask that with something that I knew would make me feel better. And that was a trip through the drive-thru, or that bag of potato chips, or something like that. The food very early on in life had become my warm blanket, Yeah,
it made you feel good.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you talk about food addiction. Do you think that people listening that it's a mix of ingredients that makes people choose food? Would you have chosen another drug or of sorts, do you think, because of your childhood? I also, when I went to the meetings for Overeaters Anonymous, I was shocked at how many young women had been molested.
Yeah.
That was not my history. Yeah. And I was absolutely floored, but apparently it is very, very common that people with eating disorders have been touched. It sounds like that was just one factor, and that you feel like maybe the divorce and your dad moving away might have been another factor, and the actual fact that you were addicted to the food.
Yeah, there was a whole lot that went into it, and I think by and large, my family is huge. My mom is somewhere in the middle of 11 children, right? So I have like 30 some odd first cousins, and unfortunately, a lot of them have dealt with substance abuse issues or alcohol, whatever the case may be. So we do have that genetic predisposition to being addicted to things. And so while a lot of people had their issues with alcohol or drugs or something like that, for me, primarily, my issue was food. That said, when I discovered marijuana, I very quickly became addicted to that. Getting high 7 and 8 times a day. So there is just something about the way that I'm wired that just, if I find something that I like, I have to keep hitting that button again and again and again and again and flipping that pleasure switch. Yeah. And I just chase it. I chase it all day, every day. And to this day, even with certain foods, I still have to like really monitor myself. I'm not sure that I'll ever get that faulty wiring fixed. It's more of a case of just managing it. And so do I think that if it wasn't food, it would have been something else? Absolutely, I do.
Yeah. Do you find that, Dotsie? Because Dotsie, I've always focused on food. In fact, I was really careful not to even start coffee or any kind of alcohol or drugs, because I felt like I was an addict when I was a teenager with food. So I just focused it all on sugar. Did you have struggles, right, with other substances, and do you feel like...
Yeah, definitely. I mean, cocaine and tons of marijuana and plenty of alcohol. I don't think I have a very addictive personality. I think quasi-addictive, but everything else I was able to stop on its own. So I think a lot of my eating disorder and the anorexia was it sounds counterintuitive because anorexia is not eating, but I was choosing that as my poison to fill the pain that I was in. And once I was able to uncover and unravel and work with the pain, and it finally became no longer there, I don't know. I haven't tried cocaine since. I mean, it was really fun. I may, but I doubt it. But you know how I love, a glass of wine, and I can have one and just be like, that was lovely, and it's just not even a thing. So
right. So Chuck, how do you say you have an addictive personality still? How do you manage it for people, for our audience who might have given up one thing but find them sinking into another?
Yeah.
Oh man, addiction transfer. That's a thing, man. That is a real thing. You just have to be hyper vigilant. And this is the way that I operate, is just knowing that about myself. Like you said that you were scared to, have that cup of coffee. And I remember that was another thing. It just popped into my head. I'd given up coffee for a few years, and then all of a sudden I'm out at this event and they had the pour over brew, that fancy thing. It looks like a chemistry set. And I was like, oh man, I can have just one cup of coffee and I'll be okay. No, I had 5 cups. And so for me, like, I do not buy into that moderation thing. And I just know that about myself. I recognize it. And most importantly, I accept that. I accept the way that I'm wired. And I'm just like, you know what? Other people can have just one. I'm not one of them. But I'll be okay, in 5 minutes. The craving's going to pass, and I'll certainly be fine tomorrow and into the future, because it's better to just wrestle with that craving there for those few minutes and get past it than it is to give in and then have to deal with a whole other set of problems or intensifying problems in the future. So I just really keep that in mind and remind myself of that time and time and time again.
Yeah. That's great advice. So you had this... this long-standing wrestling with your weight. and the addiction and the process that was unfolding inside you emotionally. What was the moment? What was the catalyst? And how did you? I know it connected with you when you said, "I thought I'd try," because I remember saying that. I remember that exact feeling. I'm just going to try, and I wonder if you felt this way. I thought there's no way I'll succeed. Like I didn't feel like I was but I thought I'm just going to give it a try. What was the catalyst and what sparked that? Where you just said one day, "Okay, I'm going to just start taking some steps."
Yeah. So many times I thought that I had reached that point, and only 2 or 3 days in, I realized quickly I had not reached rock bottom, and I was nowhere close to it. So, ultimately, it was not one thing. It was a culmination of a number of things that just had been building and building and building. Distinctly, by this point, I was in my mid-20s, just kind of flash forward here, and I had, finally reached that 400-pound mark, and I could not take more than 10 steps or so without my chest beginning to tighten. You hear so often people use the analogy, it felt like an elephant was sitting on my chest, and I was like, hey, that's a cute analogy, until I actually experienced it, and I was like, holy crap, that is the most accurate thing ever. And so that was really scary because my father's father died before I was ever born. And so every time I would feel that in my chest, I was reminded of him and thinking like, he died when he was in his 50s. And I'm not even going to make it anywhere close to that. I'm not even going to make it to 30 if I continue down this path. And that's a pretty sobering thought. But the more to it than that was two kind of emotional components that happened. And one was, by this time in my life, I was already working in broadcasting. I was working on the radio as one of those wacky morning show sidekicks. And appropriately, the station I was working at here in Washington, D.C. is WBIG, Big 100.3. And so I know, right? You can't write this. So I thought that I had to be Big Chuck to be on the air. Like, that was my personality. They promoted me as such. Let's have the big guy go out and do something stupid. He'll do it. You want to dress him up in overalls and have him run outside and call it, the Hick Olympics? Let's go ahead and do that. You want to put him up in a diaper and give him, dress him up like the cherub for Valentine's Day, even though it's freezing cold, and have him go around delivering chocolate to listeners? Let's go ahead and do that. It was like really shameful at the time, and it sucked and it hurt, but I thought that that's what I needed to do in order to achieve my dreams. So I sucked it up and I did that. But all the while that is happening, I'm also beginning to date a girl who very much was not overweight. And I thought that I had hit the jackpot when it came to love. The problem was, this girl begged and she pleaded with me on a daily basis not to tell anyone that she and I were dating. And it was like being kicked, excuse my language, it was like being kicked in the nuts day after day after day, wondering, why am I not good enough for her? She didn't want to tell her family. She didn't want to tell her friends. She didn't want to tell any of our mutual acquaintances. It was to be kept in secret. And she was angry when I let her know that I had told my family that she and I were a couple, and so to feel like you're not good enough, but this is as good as it's going to get, and to have to settle for that, like that's a heavy burden to carry for a year and a half every single day. And so when you add all of that up, and then having this shameful flight across country where you definitely can't come anywhere close to fitting into the seat, and you feel like everybody on that plane is staring at you, and you have to humiliatingly ask for a seatbelt extender just so you guys can, take off. Like, that to me, you throw all of that together, man, and it was just like, that's it. I cannot do this anymore. I absolutely can't do this anymore. And that's when I made that decision to have weight loss surgery. Didn't know anything about plant-based nutrition at that time. I just knew that I wanted to live to see 30. And I took that radical step.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people who have weight loss surgery, they are not able to change their eating after, because they haven't changed their mindset. And the doctors who do the bariatric surgery often just don't really help. And it takes a lot of, it's hard to change your eating. So just because you've had the surgery, a lot of people gain it back. I want to just give people an idea of how you ate in your 20s so that they see how far you've come now after a successful bariatric surgery. And although I know you say that bariatric surgery was only 10% of your success, but tell us a little bit about how you ate first and then what you did after the surgery that kept it off. And then this was even before you started your plant-based diet.
Oh yeah. So I was single-handedly keeping the Taco Bell in Falls Church, Virginia, in business right outside of Washington, D.C. I had a $20 a day Taco Bell habit. Now, mind you, this was 11 years ago now. So, I mean, $20 to then is probably $30 worth of food today. And I had a standing order there. It never varied. And they knew when they saw my car pull into the parking lot, just start punching it up and getting it ready. So by the time I got to the order board, they were just like, "Hi, Chuck, your total's $20. Drive on through." And so every day, sometimes
this is $20 in one time, one order.
Yeah. This
God, I thought it was over 3 meals a day. Okay.
And didn't a Taco Bell employee once tell you that you ate too much?
She did. And instead of "Hi, Chuck," it was she did. And that was a real kick in the pants. She said, literally, "You eat too much." I was like, "Wait, what?" She's like, "You eat too much." Now, the sick thing is, I had been dreading this day because I was ashamed every time I went there because I knew full well that I was eating so much. But I had been dreading this day so much that I had concocted this tale in my mind that I had like at the ready that I could just respond to whoever it was that said this to me. And that was, "Well, I'm just getting food for the guys back at the office." Now, of course, anybody could see right through it. I mean, the excuse is paper thin when you see somebody who's that heavy coming through the drive-through, but I did not miss a beat. I threw it in there and I tried to keep my composure as I picked up my food and I got out of there. And then, got choked up as I was leaving. But after she said that, I actually, decided to start driving, another few miles down the road to find another Taco Bell because I was just too ashamed to go back to that one.
So fast food was basically what you were eating. You tell us how your family, did you hide it from your family too? How you ate?
I tried. I think I was living with my brother and who's now my sister-in-law at the time, and of course they know. I mean, you think that you can hide these things, but how well can you hide anything when it comes to food when you are that size, right? And so you think that you're pulling the wool over people's eyes, and you don't want to disappoint them. Like, I remember when I was still at WBIG being paid to endorse something called the cookie diet, which is this is the most asinine thing ever. You eat a cookie for breakfast, you eat a cookie for lunch, you drink a whole mess of water, and then you eat this ambiguous sensible dinner. They never tell you what a sensible dinner is, right? But it's just ridiculous. But the thing is, like, the cookies didn't even taste like cookies. They tasted like the sponge that you have on your kitchen sink with just a sprinkle of cinnamon and one raisin. And so that's supposed to fill you up, right? It didn't really. And then I would eat this sensible dinner, which was, probably like cream spinach with some chicken and maybe a side of some other vegetable and call that good. But because I was being paid to do this, I did not feel like I could let anybody know that my food addiction was still, very much in control of me. And so I tried so hard the first 2 nights to just make it through. And by this point, the addiction had gotten so bad that, like, I was starting to detox, like night 1, like something just wasn't right. I was starting to feel a little bit sick, maybe a little bit fluish. By the second night, I was like, we had a full-blown Jekyll and Hyde situation happening. Like, I was not the most pleasant person in the world to be around. I was feeling really sick at that point, and just if you said anything to me, I was ready to rip your head off. And I remember just like laying in bed, just kind of rocking back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until I snapped and I got up and boom, I put my fist through a wall. And then, boom, I put my fist through a door just because I couldn't take it, because I wasn't getting my fix of Taco Bell, which sounds so crazy to even say that. But in the moment, man, like that was all that I wanted. I needed that Taco Bell. And so in the middle of the night, after everyone had gone to bed, I snuck out of the house and I went to the 24-hour drive-through. I placed my $20 order, came home, polished off every single bite of that, and just I wept. I wept as I was eating that, because that was the night that I fully realized I was addicted. Mm-hmm. Taco Bell had become my drug at that point.
So because of a culmination of multiple scenarios and incidences and feelings, like you said to us, you decided to get the surgery. Which I don't really know exactly what they do in bariatric surgery. They I hear staple your stomach. What actually did they do to your stomach? And then you walk out of surgery, and what are your next steps?
So basically what they do, I had what's called Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, and that's, where they take your stomach, which for me at this point was like the size of a football or a watermelon, right? And then they staple it down. They basically staple it in two so that the active part of your stomach then only becomes the size of your thumb. Meanwhile, they reroute a portion of your large intestine. So that's the bypass part. And so that's why a lot of people who have issues post-surgery, malabsorption issues, they're not getting enough vitamins and nutrients because they're bypassing the portion of the intestines that typically would absorb all of that stuff for you. So that's what I did. And it was a long road back, man, to get to being able to eat normally again. But here's what I'd like to stress, because there are people who are critical of bariatric surgery. And one of the most common questions I get is like, well, would you do it differently, now that you know about plant-based nutrition? Maybe. But I don't regret my decision, because that was all I knew at the time and I was desperate. So I absolutely do not regret that decision. And it is not a cheat way out, because as I call it, the rate of recidivism with weight loss surgery is very similar to failed diets. Yeah. The longer you are out of it, the more likely you are to put that weight back on. And it is because when you go to have that surgery, they don't teach you a daggone thing about eating properly. As a matter of fact, my surgeon, the day that I went in for consultation, told the group I was with, if this one doesn't work for you, don't worry. You can come back for a revisionist surgery where they staple your stomach a second time.
Oh, jeez.
Right.
So
right.
Nothing about changing your lifestyle afterwards? Or do they just think, oh, well, your stomach's smaller, so you'll be able to fit fewer calories in? Because you can stretch that stomach
again.
Yeah.
Tell me about it. Like, my stomach is I'd like to think it's normal size. You should see the size of the salads I'm crushing at night now. But it's just a shame. No, they don't really do a whole lot for you as far as lifestyle. They give you this menu to follow immediately after surgery that walks you from liquids to pureed to soft foods, then eventually back to solids. But then once you hit that like 6, maybe 4-month window, they're like, you're on your own, you're good to go. They give you no sort of nutrition counseling. All they do for that time is to ask you to come back every couple of weeks to get weighed in. And then, because very early on I had made up my mind, like, I'm not going back to eating fast food again, because I had realized by that point that was my problem. That was my drug. I was not putting that in my body any longer. But once I reached that goal weight, which at the time was 160, so that's about 20 pounds heavier than I am today. If I'm lying, I'm dying. The surgeon looked me dead in the eye, sitting across the desk from him, and said, you need to eat a hamburger. And that was when I realized that there was something tremendously messed up with this system. Because even though, again, I didn't know anything about plant-based nutrition, I didn't know anything about what a healthy diet truly was. What I did know was he essentially just told a crack addict, it's okay,
Have a little
have
bit.
one rock, you're going to be fine. No, it doesn't work like that.
What you had the surgery in 2009, but you didn't go to a whole food or a plant-based diet with very healthy plant-based diet until 4 years ago. So what did you do in between that kept you losing weight and stabilizing, not going up like most folks do after bariatric surgery?
I got addicted to just walking for a while. So on my lunch break, it kind of astounded me that I went from being able to walk, just 10 feet to then being able to walk across the street and then around the block and 2 blocks and 3 blocks. Eventually, it got up to the point where I was walking 5 miles every single day on my lunch break. And so just really relying on that and keeping my body moving really helped me improve my lifestyle overall. And even though I didn't know like what a healthy diet really was yet, like I thought I was gravitating toward healthier foods at that point, at least foods that had, fewer calories and less fat. So a lot of times that would include like MetaFast bars, right? And I mean, I would just crush those things like they were nothing. Like I love those things so much. And so I started depending on those for the first few years. Here's something I've never admitted, though, and I must apologize to my friends back in the day. Those things that they give to bariatric patients give them the world's worst gas, and it is just god-awful. And so I am so sorry for anybody that spent any length of time with me back then. But
no, wait, was that just because of what you were eating? They told you to eat, or was it because your intestines had been cut and all that?
Both. Absolutely both. So this was part of the packet of food that they recommended that you purchase after you have the surgery.
MetaFast
so they give
bars?
you like, MetaFast was part of it. And so it was, if you look at the ingredients list, I mean, it's as long as my arm.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize that things like soy protein isolate, aren't necessarily the healthiest things in the world. All I saw was, oh, no fat. Great, let's do this. But then I began seeing a girl who I met, reconnected with at my high school reunion, and she was very much into nutrition. And so this was about a year or so after the surgery, and I had lost a lot of weight, and she had been following my story on Facebook. And so she had taken a lot of nutrition classes, and so she started counseling me to read the ingredients list. And so that's kind of what planted that seed. And then over time, it just graduated more and more and more until eventually I began doing an interview for CBS with a professional wrestler by the name of Austin Aries. Mm-hmm. And he's the one that said, dude, you need to watch this documentary. You're such a health nut. Why don't you go ahead and, give this plant-based thing a try? And so I did. And that's when it went from just being a weight loss tool for me to like lowering my risk of Alzheimer's, cancer, heart disease, all of those things that I've been concerned about my entire life because they also run in my family. Like I call that now next level nutrition. And so it was a number of years and it was just a long process to get there, but I'm so grateful that I am here.
Yeah. And that girl was also the one that introduced you said, to kimchi, which is you're eternally grateful for. But so after the plant-based wrestler Austin said that to you, were you the next day, did you just start diving in and say, okay, let me see what this looks like? Because it's so frustrating and sad to me that diet equals not real food for most people, right? It's like if you can eat this cookie or this weird wafer or this bar, like if you're on a diet, you can't actually eat food. And we know that to be just this idiocy, right? Like it's exactly what you should eat. Yeah. To change. Yeah. So what did those first couple weeks and months look like as you started traversing what Austin had suggested to you?
Wow, man, it was a lot of feeling out. Austin suggested me to watch the documentary, but he sure as heck did not give me any sort of menu plan. So it was more initially about eliminating meat and dairy from the diet and keeping everything else. And then eventually finding other things. So that's, like so many people, I found out about, Gardein, and products like that. And so I went that route, and then eventually over time learned more and more and more about nutrition and whole food, plant-based nutrition. And so that was a process. But it was a lot of salads, nuts, and trail mix. Really, that was my go-to snack, which kind of actually it had me concerned just because of the fat content in nuts. But I'll tell you, like, and Dotsie, you're someone who can appreciate this. Like, I was a dairy junkie at that point, not a fast food junkie, but I mean, I was drinking well over a half gallon of milk every day. And so when I came off of that, man, my gut was doing backflips, like changing up the bacteria in there. And so there was a good 2-week period where I was like, really feeling kind of bloated. And but I stuck with it because I knew, just based off of research, that would subside over time. And then one day, it just seemed like overnight that dissipated. And my wife had a similar experience. So once that was gone, man, I mean, it was smooth sailing.
Speaking of your wife, a lot of times when people lose weight, their family around them, their relationships with the dynamics within the relationship change. I don't know when you met your wife through your weight loss journey, but can you explain how it helped or hurt your relationship, the changes that you made with diet and weight loss?
Yeah, man, my wife is, God, I love her so much. I could not have found a more perfect person. I will tell you that but she and I both have that broadcasting background, and she is someone who I had a big old crush on her way back to my days at Big 100.3. And we had so many mutual friends, and the guy who I was doing the morning show with, he would always hang out with her and come back and talk about, the good times that they would have. They would go out as a group, and I would be like, oh man, he got to hang out with Julie. That's so cool. But like, I had zero confidence at that point in my life, and I did not want to meet her looking the way that I did. And so years later, when I was working as a reporter at CBS, she was also employed there at the radio station. And I just one day, hit the talkback line. She was broadcasting out of her house, and I was like, hey, this is Chuck. And she's like, hey, I'm a fan of yours. I was flattered. And then like years later, she told me I had no idea who you were when you first introduced yourself. But I mean, you just meet the one, and everything fell into place. And for the first time, especially like after being hidden in that previous relationship, I was like, I'm not going to be hidden. We're going to be together. We're going to be out about it. And that's just the way that it's got to be. And she was like all for it, and it was fantastic. And she loved me unconditionally. And but the day that I told Julie that I was going vegan, she was not pleased initially. She was not pleased because she's like, you're already the healthiest eater that I know. Now what are you doing? You want to go vegan? What do you mean you don't want to eat meat? What do you mean you don't want to drink milk anymore? And I was like, all right, that's cool. Let's push pause on this conversation. Give me a little bit of time. Let's sit down and watch this documentary together. And God bless her. She was like, as soon as the credits started to roll on that, she's like, we're going vegan.
I love her.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not afraid.
Did you meet her when you were heavier, or you were at your ideal weight?
Oh, at my ideal weight. I was terrified of meeting her, and I'm actually really, really glad that I did not meet her when I was younger, because I really think that she and anybody else really, I think it's really hard to get past that first impression. And so maybe that's all they'll ever see you as. And even though I had changed significantly, like I just don't know. I just don't know whether she or anybody else could have fallen in love with somebody whom they met initially when they were 420 pounds, and that's the cynical part of me. Yeah. But that's also me being, very open and honest about it. She swears up and down that it wouldn't have mattered. I'm a cynic. I'm a cynic with that one. I'm just so grateful that things worked out the way that they did.
Yeah, that's the whole point. You shared with us that there are some areas where you still struggle. which I think is just, first of all, it's just so appreciated by anyone that is listening, that you're this open and you're this transparent and you're this willing to share, because you're saying, everything's not perfect. Everything's not, always smooth sailing. You said that it can be a major mental wrestling match to not eat when you're not hungry, and then to stop eating when you're full. Still today, this, you felt like this maybe yesterday, and that it makes you angry. It really makes you angry that that's still an experience that you have. What does that feel like, and what do you do with that now that you have, changed so much about the your whole sphere of life in terms of food, and what you think it is and how it fuels you?
Well, I'll tell you the first thing, it helps just to be open and honest about it, because when you start to hide things, that's when you start to run into trouble. And so, just to be able to speak with you guys about this and on the exam room about it from time to time is super, super beneficial. But to this day, as you said, like, I hate it when I reach the end of that meal. And I hate it when I start to feel full, because I still get such enjoyment out of eating that I don't want that enjoyment to end. Even if I know if I keep going, it's going to lead me down a bad road, and I could just open up Pandora's box and go right back to the way that I had been. And I don't care if I'm gorging on Taco Bell. I don't care if I'm gorging on healthy food. I don't want to gorge anymore. That to me is just, it's a dangerous, risky behavior. And so I fight with myself almost on a daily basis with that. And I accept it. It's just one of those faults. And I think that it's far more common than a lot of people realize. But just as kind of, we were talking about those cravings over time subsiding, once you get past that 3 or 5 minutes, whatever the case may be, you're going to be okay. And so I have this mental wrestling match for that time, and I get all worked up. But then eventually it kind of subsides, and I'm good to go after that, because I know these 5 minutes, they're going to suck. It's going to be rough, but it's best that I deal with it for 5 minutes than I have to try to, really, really, really dig myself out of another hole that I had dug for myself. So you just deal with it. You just absolutely have to deal with it.
Yeah. It's kind of the upside of food addiction, and in comparison to alcohol addiction, or, drug addiction, or maybe even sex addiction, is you get to have it again, like in 3 hours or 4 hours. Like, if it's, and I love to eat, and I love the experience. And I know Alexander does not like to feel full. I do. And I can so relate to that, where I'll just like finish something that's super yummy, or all of us vegans completely over order. Well, she probably doesn't, but I over order at every vegan restaurant I go to in the world, because I'm just so excited that there's all these options, and I'll usually overeat in those circumstances. But it's so fun, and it's so exploratory, and it feels so good to be putting in food that's hopefully not harming any other being, that you get like this bit of high off of just that alone. And I can't wait for the next time. And I can relate to, like, I don't quite want it to end in that moment. And sometimes I will continue and have like more. Like, I finished dinner last night, and then it was like, oh, I had some crackers and hummus. And it's like, I'm not hungry anymore. Like, I'm definitely not hungry. It's just like, stop.
You can
Just
have
stop.
it
Yeah.
later.
Just breathe. Yes. And that's the
have
beauty. Like, you can't have, if you're an alcoholic, you can't be like, I'll have a beer later. It's like, no. And it's like, I feel like we should celebrate that. Stop, get through those 5 minutes, like you said, because you're going to get to do it tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
For your breakfast.
Amen.
Yeah.
It's funny, because I feel that I literally asked my husband, Ian, a couple weeks ago, I said, do you feel sad at the end when you're eating something you like? Don't you feel a little sad? He said, no. I said, I do every time. And it's this like, and I don't, because I don't binge anymore, that's, the binging is
your
there.
end is your end.
Do you eat slowly? Because I realize that would elongate my enjoyment of the food, but I tend to eat a little too fast. So I'm wondering, Chuck, if from when you were eating a lot of food in Taco Bell, did you develop a habit of eating fast, and do you still do that, or have you managed to savor now?
Oh, I'm a big savorer.
Oh,
Is that a
good.
word? Savorer?
Sure, it can be.
I definitely pump the brakes. It takes me minimum a half an hour to eat a meal. And I am always the last one to finish.
Wow.
Some people will have gone back for seconds, and I will, still be working on my plate, and I'm okay with that. I like to take my time. I like to give my blood sugar time to rise, and that's another tool or trick that I use to make sure that I'm not rushing through things, and making sure that I'm eating just the right amount, and not too much. And so yeah, and I find that I enjoy the meal so much more anyway, when I really savor it. Sometimes I'm eating so slow I have to go to the microwave and reheat it because it's gotten cold, but I'm really, really enjoying it. So yeah, I mean, that's a big tip that I give a lot of people who ask.
I would like a little bit of an advice session then, and I get to just be a little selfish because I'm talking right now, but it's for everyone out there. I am a vacuum cleaner in every meal. I'll say, oh, stop and slow down. What are the steps? Because I'm positive you didn't do that with Taco Bell, or did you? If you're going to tell me you ate okay, you just it's just in.
Yep.
So how did you develop this habit of really enjoying and slowly eating and allowing yourself to see when you're actually satiated instead of just being like, holy crap, all of a sudden I'm really full, which is what happens when you're a vacuum cleaner.
Yeah, it was a little thing that really started to pay big results, and that was just counting the number of times that I chewed. And it was annoying as crap the first year, even just counting to 40 every single time you took a bite. But then it just becomes habit, and you don't really even I don't count in my head anymore. You just kind of know. It's muscle memory at this point. And so really making sure that you take the time to adequately chew your food, savor it, make sure that it's nice and broken down before you swallow, which that sounds disgusting, but whatever. You just chew it a lot. And that is really what made me realize, like, take your time, slow your brakes, and you're good to go. And then I also will watch the clock as well. And just be like, all right, I'm ahead of pace now, so let me just slow it down. Like, I guess really what you're kind of making me realize here, guys, is that I'm still a very funny eater. I just manage my diet completely differently than I used to.
And it's working for you. The chewing, was there like a goal, or you just realized when I do it the way I want to do it, it equals 40 chews?
I think somebody had tipped me off to the number 40.
Oh, okay.
And so that's just kind of what stuck to me. It's like 40 chews is akin to 10,000 steps a day, right? Do you really need 10,000? Can you go for 12,000? Yeah, of course you can.
Right.
But 40 just seems to be, that
Yeah.
that sweet spot. And that's really what worked for me.
It's really important to chew. I just finished a book about chewing. It was about breathing. But one of the things was that we don't chew enough. All our food is super soft. So when you eat a whole food, plant-based diet, you have more fiber and stuff
Totally.
like that rather
You
than
have to
processed
chew.
food.
You
And it
choke.
actually helps change our mouth. It'll
Right.
be another show, actually. We are going to be interviewing the author of that book. So, but anyway, good for you for chewing. And I'm sure it's good for your teeth, too. And a very good tip, also putting your fork down or using chopsticks and putting them down can also help us take smaller bites and eat more slowly, right?
Let it digest.
Huge. Putting your fork down between every bite, that is another big time thing.
Yeah.
Since you're a cynic, I want you to not be for a second.
Okay.
When you look back on Chuck that we talked about in the first half of this podcast, and Chuck now, what are you most proud of?
That I'm still here. I mean, as we record this, I'm 3 days removed from turning 38, and I didn't think that I was going to live to see 30. And to not just be here, but to be able to share this story and know that it's impacting people and reaching people so that they then can have their own success. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. The emails that I get from people who listen to the show or are familiar with my story and say, hey, thank you so much. This has inspired me. I've now lost 20 pounds, 50 pounds, 100 pounds, whatever the case may be. My blood pressure is now under control. My cholesterol is so much lower. Like, to me, that is so much better than any paycheck. Just to know that you're able to help somebody on that level when the things that they're doing, what seem to be absolutely impossible. Absolutely impossible. So to be able to play a little part in helping people like that, that to me is by far and away what I'm most proud of. Has nothing to do with going from a 66-inch waist down to a 32. It's all about helping others.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
What do you, when you see somebody who looks like they're dealing with food addiction like you did, do you do anything, or do you just think, oh, I feel bad for that person, I hope they find the answer?
In my mind, I just want to give them a hug. And food addiction is like any other thing. Like if you're not ready to change, you're not going to change. So that person has to be ready and willing to change. I'm not going to go up to anybody in a grocery store randomly, who's got a shopping cart full of junk food and just start telling them about my story. Because I remember being that way and having people come up and comment on what was in my shopping cart and just being devastated, even though they were well-intentioned. So I'm not going to put the person in that position, but I do have a lifetime full of sympathy for them. I know exactly where they are, even if they don't yet recognize it themselves.
Yeah.
And what about how we treat people who are overweight? I'm wondering if people might take offense at the fact that you said that I can't see how my wife would want to be with me at 420 pounds. And so I know that there is a huge prejudice in our society about people who are obese, even though I know that 2/3 of Americans are overweight. Is that correct, Chuck? You probably know the stat more.
Yep.
And a
2/3
third are obese?
Yep. It's right on up there.
Can you comment on how we treat people who are obese? And also, it sounds like you also feel a sort of, like you didn't feel like you were worth Julie's love either, even though you're the same person, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I've changed a lot, but by and large, I am the same person that I always was, or at the very least, I'm the person who I always wanted to be, the person who, was always in there, but, I felt like I had to wear this mask and be this bigger than life personality, just to kind of, I guess, match my size. So, there is, still this stigma, about being overweight, which is an absolute shame. And so, yeah, I realized like it sounds really messed up to say that my wife probably wouldn't want to be with me if I was 420 pounds. But I also believe, just being honest with myself, that is the God's honest truth. She will swear up and down that was not the case. And maybe it was just all the negative comments that I got when I was so overweight that still to this day has my confidence shook. But yeah, man, the tide is turning though, as far as body acceptance. And there's a lot of good that comes with that, because everybody deserves to be treated as equal. I don't care if you're 600 pounds or you're 100 pounds. You have just as much worth as anybody else on the face of this earth, And so it's time that people just wake the hell up and realize that when you see somebody who is that overweight, they are dealing with a substance abuse issue. The person who's 100 pounds and people will hold the door for, and catcall, they may be going home and shooting up heroin. Okay, but they can hide that addiction. But the person who is 600 pounds, they cannot hide it. They are literally wearing it on their sleeve. And addiction is addiction is addiction. And you're not going to kick a heroin addict. You're going to say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. How can I help you? Can we get you some help? Can we send you to rehab? Whatever the case may be. But with somebody who's overweight, they're viewed as lazy, they're viewed as incompetent, they're viewed as just generally being a slob who's letting themselves go when nothing could be further from the truth. And so I really hope that as more people understand that, then more people will learn to treat obesity a little bit differently, and then you'll start to see obesity treatments a little bit differently so that people can get off of these stupid fad diets and keep the weight off long term and get healthy long term. That is my hope.
Too, I think that, I know for me, I would probably say I wouldn't have wanted to have met Kirk when I was anorexic and, with dark circles under my eyes, looking like I'm 80, losing my hair, bones sticking out everywhere. And it wasn't really because I didn't think that I would be attractive to him. It's because who I was at that period of time. I was deceitful. I would snap at anyone at the drop of a hat. I was so moody. I was kind of mean, and I wasn't enjoyable to be around. I wasn't lighthearted. I wasn't really joyful. I wasn't in life at all. I was kind of a recluse. So, maybe it's also, Chuck, with us, and too, is just there's that piece where you just go, it wasn't the person. My behavior was not the person who I really am, and who you are now, and who I am now, and the behavior that we want to show to these people that we love the most in the whole wide world.
Absolutely. Just putting on a mask, man. And I tell people, I speak about this on the show. It's like, be the person who you always wanted to be. That person is already inside of you. It's just a matter of finding that fortitude, that will to pull that person out and embrace them. Everybody already is that incredible person who they inspire to be. They don't realize it yet.
Yeah.
And so you just got to reflect inward and, let the soul shine.
And sometimes you have to push past the pain, get through it, and deal with it, and the addiction. So I think there's pain. There's a pain component, and an addiction component to that. Yeah. That stops the real Dotsy, the real Chuck, the real Alexandra from coming out. You have this amazing podcast where you've interviewed so many luminaries in the plant-based world. What are one or two things that you really have been big takeaways for you after interviewing and learning from these people?
I think number one was something I learned very early on from Dr. Barnard, was that, he says this so frequently, genes do not have to be your destiny. And so then to understand the science about genetics, you don't just inherit your genes, you inherit your family's eating habits as well. And so that's why you see, families where heart disease is so prevalent, cancer, diabetes, you have that genetic makeup that puts you at a greater risk, but it's that food that is flipping the switch on that gene on and off. And so if you have the ability to really flip that switch off and then take control and put yourself in the best position possible not to have to deal with that kind of chronic illness, that to me is so huge. I love that so very much. And then the other thing is just the amazing support that is in this community of doctors and others who have had this success, and this camaraderie, and genuinely this desire to help other people, that spurs me on to keep putting the exam room out there and keep sharing the story. And that's why I'm so grateful to be on the show with you today. I really hope somebody hears this and is like, oh my God, I identify so much with that. I can do this too. Yeah. And so knowing that in this world where there's so many distractions and there's so much bad news that comes on the TV day after day after day, that there is still a whole heck of a lot of good out there, and there is a lot of people, a lot of high-ranking luminaries that want to help you. And you just have to be ready to change and accept that help. And you will be on your merry way, and you will achieve things that you thought were unachievable.
Wow. Well, thank you so much.
When are you writing a book?
Yeah.
I don't know. Hopefully soon.
Okay, good.
I would love to sit down at some point.
You need to do a memoir. Yeah. This was really inspiring. I know that absolutely there's going to be many people that hear this and go, okay, I can do this. I can do this.
And it's because you share your story so honestly and with such detail that people will, I'm sure, have the courage to also explore their own pain and start on the journey. So thank you so much, Chuck. Everybody listen to Chuck on the Exam Room podcast. It is such a good podcast. And Chuck is such a positive, joyous, your voice is always so enthusiastic for every guest. It's really wonderful to listen to the podcast. So thank you. And thank you for being on our podcast.
Oh, thank you guys. This has been a real treat.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.